How do you share the story of a 70-year career in a 10-minute show? To do just the highlights is a challenging task, and I know I can't share everything. My hope is to do justice to the pieces I felt were important to share about Tony Bennett, the artist. Born Anthony Dominic Benedetto, August 3rd, 1926, Tony Bennett grew up a part of an Italian immigrant family in the middle of the Great Depression in New York. And his father died when he was quite young. He was 10 years old, but he left a huge impact on Tony through the stories that people told about his father. It was said that his father would go to the top of a mountain and everyone in the valley could hear him sing. And that impacted Tony so much that he knew, hearing that story, that that's what he was going to do for his life. It wasn't even that he wanted to do it, even though he had a passion. He felt that he had to do it. He was introduced to the entertainment world by his Uncle Dick, who had been a vaudeville tap dancer, and introduced him to the performance part when Tony was about 13. In 1944, when he was about 18 years old, of course World War II is happening, and he got drafted and was part of the infantry in France and Germany. For a short time after the war, he stayed on with the Special Services Band, entertaining the troops, and he stayed with that until 1946 when he was discharged. When he came back to the United States, the GI Bill was put in place to help soldiers kind of get back into civilian life, and he was able to take advantage of that and get formal training in New York at the American Theater Wing in New York City. During this time, he created a stage name of Joe Barry, and he played in a lot of nightclubs that were attached to organized crime. And he just kind of did odd nightclubs here and there, performing to kind of get his chops up and to make some money. One day in 1949, while he was auditioning for a gig, a headliner by the name of Pearl Bailey saw him and approached him and asked him to sing with her, and insisted that he perform with her at the Greenwich Village Inn. And when the owner of the club kind of hesitated, she was quoted as saying, "Either the boy stays on my show or I'm not playing here." It was at a Pearl Bailey show that Bob Hope first saw Tony Bennett and approached him and took him along with him actually to perform at the Paramount Theater. And on the fly, introducing Tony Bennett, instead of Joe Barry and instead of Anthony Dominic Benedetto, Bob Hope thought, those aren't names that are going to stick. He wanted an American name. And so he introduced him as Tony Bennett for the first time on the fly. And Tony Bennett said that he actually had to call his name twice because Tony Bennett didn't know who he was talking about. He wasn't ready for that name. And so Bob Hope picked that up on the fly and it stuck. In 1950, Mitch Miller, which some folks might recognize his name with his sing-alongs and stuff, at the time he was an executive at Columbia Records. He heard a demo of Tony Bennett and signed him right away. That following year, 1951, he had his first #1 with the song Because of You, which held the #1 spot for 10 weeks. Not bad for a first #1. That was followed that same year, like 6 months later, with his second #1, which was Cold Cold Heart, and it stayed at #1 for 6 weeks. And then in 1953, he achieved his third #1, which was Rags to Riches, and it spent 8 weeks on the chart. Interestingly enough, you won't find Tony Bennett on the Billboard charts list because these hits were done prior to the existence of Billboard. Billboard didn't start until 1958, so he had these #1s on the radio 5 years before the Billboard charts existed. Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra first met shortly after Tony Bennett had hit 2 million in record sales. When he met Frank Sinatra, he discovered that he was Frank Sinatra's favorite singer. And what's interesting is Frank Sinatra was Tony Bennett's favorite singer, so they had that. They really, really admired each other. And Frank Sinatra was quoted as saying, "He's the best singer in the business." And Frank Sinatra wasn't the only great at the time to say that about Tony Bennett. Bing Crosby was quoted as saying, "He's the best singer I've ever heard." Tony and Frank would later perform together on one of Frank Sinatra's shows called Frank and Friends in 1977. Tony Bennett was the first male pop artist to perform with the Count Basie Orchestra. And along with the Count Basie Orchestra, later he would record one of his most famous songs, "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." And that was in 1962. And though it was one of his most famous songs, it only charted at number 19. That was the highest it ever made it on the charts. With 7 decades and 70 albums to his credit, he once said, "I never sing a song the same way twice. I agree completely with Miles Davis. It's better musically to leave something hanging and suspended, and that changes every night." There were many other things that he was involved with throughout his career. He was a painter, he was a business owner, he started the record label Improv Records, and he ran that from 1974 to 1977. And then in 1999, he and his wife founded the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts in New York. Tony Bennett performed with numerous artists as well. They include Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Amy Winehouse, Paul McCartney, Bono, Sting, George Michael, Elton John, Billy Joel, Queen Latifah, Elvis Costello, Miles Davis, Count Basie, Willie Nelson, Aretha Franklin, Lady Gaga, Michael Bublé, James Taylor, and many, many more. Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga recorded 2 albums together. One was in 2014 called Cheek to Cheek, and the other was Love for Sale in 2021. And Tony Bennett heard Lady Gaga sing and called her a jazz singer, which was quite a compliment because Lady Gaga had always wanted to be a jazz singer, and Tony Bennett was one of her idols. So to hear him say that of her was quite a big compliment. I'd like to share some of his achievements and accolades. This isn't a complete list. He holds a few world records. One was the longest period of time between original release and re-recorded release of the same single by the same artist, and that difference was 68 years, 342 days. Same single, same artist. He holds the record for the oldest person to reach number 1 on a US album chart with a newly recorded album. He holds the record for oldest person to release an album of new material at 95 years and 58 days. He holds the record for the most Grammys won for Best Traditional Pop Vocal Album with 14 wins. He also holds a record for the longest time between UK Top 20 albums with 39 years in between. And oldest person to enter the UK Top 20 album chart at 80 years old. Pretty impressive. That's quite a few Guinness Book of World Records to hold as a musician, so pretty impressive. Tony Bennett has numerous awards prior to his music career as well. He was awarded the Bronze Star and the CIB Award for his involvement in the Battle of the Bulge and for his involvement with the liberation of the Kaufering concentration camp, which was a sub-camp of Dachau. His entertainment career boasts an incredible list of awards, 2 Emmys and 20 Grammys, among other awards. His Emmys were won in 1996 for Outstanding Performance for a Variety or Music Program for his Valentine's Day special, and in 2007 for Outstanding Individual Performance in a Program for Tony Bennett, an American Classic. His Grammy wins spanned from 1963 to 2022. They included Best Solo Vocal Male Performance, Record of the Year, Lifetime Achievement, Best Pop Duo Group Performance, Album of the Year, Best Pop Collaboration with Vocals, and Best Traditional Pop Performance. In closing, I'd like to share a quote of Tony's. He said, "Through song and art, I can communicate what I believe is the essence of life, truth and beauty. In my time, I've seen both go out of style, but they always come back in vogue." Thanks for watching.